right. Hello, and welcome to this interview with Peter Bathurst, the director of the selected film Air from Another Planet. We are very happy to have you here, and thank you very much for taking your time to talk with us about your film.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Maybe you would like to introduce yourself a little bit and yeah, the obvious question at the beginning, why you decided to make this film?
Sure, happily. My name is Peter Bathurst, and I've got a background in cinematography. I've been working as a cinematographer for a couple of decades now, but I've always been interested in the overall process, and I studied screenwriting as well, and I moved into academia as well as continuing my practice, and in part to be able to pursue various projects that I've been interested in. One of them was a story of Richard Goertzel and his experiences and friendship and relationship with the Schoenbergs, which I found out about through a book by a guy called Alex Ross, which is called The Rest is Noise, which is a history of the classical music in the 20th century. And I just thought it was the most extraordinary tale, and I was surprised that it didn't have, I suppose, more currency or wasn't known more widely. And I began work on the idea, and then an opportunity arose to couple the idea with a virtual reality experience. And this film, in its first iteration, is an introduction to a broader set of experiences which lean into the new technologies. The first one is a kind of you watch the film in a head. You can watch the film in a headset, and that then sort of introduces you to these concepts, and then you can walk around the room where these tragic events happened and find out more about the three characters and explore it from their own perspectives. That's still a work in progress, and Air from Another Planet is the short film that sort of leads into the larger stories. So I was interested in one of the things I was most interested in was the idea that there are kind of three protagonists, I suppose, rather than just one, and the idea that if you watched a car crash and we were all interviewed about what happened in the car crash, we would all say we saw something different, even though we'd apparently seen the same events. So that idea of sort of subjectivity was sort of key to it, amongst obviously other key themes of young male suicide, which is appallingly high, and so it draws attention to those things. And I suppose I like the idea that whilst we look back at this time now, 1908, and it all seems quite classical already, I suppose, to some extent, and these people seem sort of, I suppose, quite mannered or stiff from the current perspective. What's always interesting to bear in mind is at the time it was incredibly contemporary. They were sort of dangerous young artists doing really interesting, exciting stuff and pushing the boundaries of the world that they were in. And all of those things I found really appealing.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear. And also that you're continuing to work on that topic. Actually, maybe a stupid question. Why the title? Where does it come? Where comes the idea?
Air from Another Planet.
Yeah.
The piece of music which is central to the story, which is, I suppose, the kind of leaping off point of inspiration for the artist Arnold Schoenberg, borrowed from a poem which uses the line, "I feel air from another planet." And so it's sort of exploring that idea of a sort of an alienation or an estrangement, but in the title itself is a quote from the song that was part of the fourth movement of his second piano sonata, which was the sorry, I've got that wrong. It's his I should know this obviously, but it's very early in the morning. But it's basically the piece of music that he wrote off the back of, or around the time of Goetzel's death. And there's various arguments about whether it was to do with what happened, but he also dedicated it to his wife. So there seems to be something in that. And it was notorious at the time, and it launched atonality as a kind of musical movement, and he became the kind of godfather of that to some extent, and that cemented his career. And it was released 7 weeks after Goetzel died. So there's lots in that, and that's the lyric that gives us the title.
That already gives us a very good idea how intense your research must have been. It's very, very interesting to hear all this background information.
One of those things. It's like it's a huge story, but because I suppose the characters are I suppose maybe not that mainstream, but are still very well known and very well renowned, that you find out that once you scratch the surface, there's already an incredible amount written on it, particularly about Schoenberg, because he has a really large reputation. I found myself sort of blundering into it, thinking that you could just sort of do what you wanted in terms of deciding where to pick it up from, as long as you're honouring dates and times and trying to do right by what you understand of the characters. And then it turns out books and books have been written, and there's lots of sort of even conflicting ideas about who said what and when and what was really meant. And there's a lot by Schoenberg and about Schoenberg, and there's quite a lot, even though he tried to burn most of his material, there's quite a lot about Goetzel, but there's very little by Matilda, who was central to it. I suppose that was just the nature of being a woman in those times. But she's an interesting character whose voice we tried to tease out in the voiceover, because she gets sort of passed off as being this small mousy woman of no import, mother of two, but actually she had a massive impact on 2 men. And Schoenberg stayed with her, wanted her back and stayed with her right till her untimely death. So yeah, there's a lot to it.
It was very interesting as well that you took her voice actually to basically tell the story. That it was very good.
At the moment, I think it's a really rich theme. I think there's, and again, once you start to look, there are a lot of women who have stood by men who have made their names, and obviously we know the men, we know their body of work, etc., etc. And what we don't know is the women. Often they didn't have the same opportunity, perhaps, to fulfill their own potential, but they still, played a really significant part. And this is only one of those stories. There's loads of others that I've discovered already, and I'm sure there's a load more that I already don't know about, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more of them.
Yeah. You also mentioned already the soundtrack, which I think it's very, very interestingly combined, and I think it was written for the film. It's at least
well,
sounds like it.
There. So we used the string quartet. I'm very lucky that my neighbours have a string quartet.
Oh, right.
And so I co-opted them into first playing the Schoenberg piece. To use as the sort of part of the body of it, but then we also had an original score written that sort of, I suppose, carries the mood and the sentiment and riffs off it to some extent. And then we shamelessly cut and crashed those elements into each other for the sound design to sort of build the mood of the denouement.
Yeah, but I think it's very interesting if people would see them when they see the film at the festival. That how you combined it, and it really you can really feel the mood in the film with that. So that's very interesting.
Good to hear. Yeah. I had some concerns over it myself because, particularly because there's a voice and there are lyrics, and it's not in my mother tongue, and I have no real idea of how those things actually sound or come across to a native ear, if you like. or how that works on that level. I know sort of how I feel that it works on the dramatic level, and that feels fine to me. But obviously there's a level it's happening on that I can't appreciate. So it's good to hear that it feels all right.
Yeah, this already brings you to the next question, because we also discussed it quite recently, that often historical films are related to the country where the filmmakers are from. And so it was very interesting film from you that you took this topic from this part of Europe. Maybe can you also tell us? You already told us about the why you choose, but how was it for you to? Was it a very normal approach just to use this geographic area, or is it normally more comfortable for you if you choose a topic which takes place in your country?
That's a good question. I mean, I suppose you're starting off from everything kind of being imagined and subjective anyway, and there were all sorts of challenges, you know, like particularly when we came to the world building for the virtual reality, there were all kinds of new things to trip over, which is that we had the opportunity. Let me try and tell it a different way. So because we were in COVID, we had to, at the time that we started to make the project, we had to commit to the virtual reality part of it first, which was tricky, but it was the only thing to do because you couldn't go anywhere or do anything, and you couldn't be in any locations. But it turns out, because of the world we're in now, with such a lot of research and information on the internet, available on the internet, we could use the actual floor plan of the Schoenberg apartments and the Gertzfeld studio as the basis for the rooms that we built in virtual reality. And that seems, wow, what a privilege to be able to do that. But then at the same time, when we came to shoot it, obviously we weren't going to shoot in those rooms. They're somebody's house and they're in Vienna, and we couldn't go there. So then the room that we shot in is a different room to that. So you're kind of up against that sort of dilemma from the start, and you're up against the dilemma of, which is a difficult one as well, and I still don't know what the right answer to this is as well, is when you have characters speaking in a foreign language, do you give them the accent, or do you allow them to still have their own accent? You can go either way with that. We gave them what we thought were true accents, and we went down that road. But in the end, the reason, the story in itself was fascinating, and where it was set was equally fascinating. One of the things that's fascinating about Vienna in 1908, which is a pivotal year for it as a city, at the end of its sort of long empire, and everything changing in Europe at the same time. Apparently, if you walked into the Grand Cafe in 1908, you could have had Hitler in one corner, Freud in another corner, and Trotsky in another corner, all thinking their thoughts and plotting their schemes. And that in itself is a kind of extraordinary thing. So in the end, I suppose it feels like it's all up for grabs, and you just have to do your best to try to be truthful to it. And you can't, however hard you try, even if you got everything spot on, it wouldn't be accurate, because there was only ever the real people in that moment, and that, you know, you can't travel back in time, you can't revisit those actual people. All you can do is interpret it. And if I'd done that as a resident of Vienna, it would have still have been imagined. There would have been arguably more veracity to it. But what's interesting about art and storytelling is that you're trying to create a different level of truth. You're trying to create an interior truth, and that feels more valid to me than ever when even facts are up for debate, you know, in the world that we're in. But what you can't argue with is your response, your emotional response to a topic. And that's also a human thing, you know. Gertzfeld, 25, making the appalling decision he made based on how he felt, however specific that was to November in Vienna in 1908, that's universal. That could have happened to anybody at any time and could still happen in the same way now. So I was taking a liberty, but I was happy to take it.
Oh, thank you very much. That was very well said. It's, yeah. And
there is a side topic I'd like to tackle. It's about the cinematography of the film. You're starting with some archive material, and it kind of fades into the more modern film approach. You're using black and white, also colored next to each other, and also with fades to one another. So there is like these two dimensions you're bringing together, like the three classic arts into a modern approach, like a film it is. And so there is some kind of dialectic between the two. How did you tackle it on a more cinematographic side? What was your mindset when you started using archive material to digital material, and how did you bring those together to make something that is more immersive than just filmed on like with modern technology and only modern grading or modern lenses or stuff like that, because there is some very conscious decisions behind the scenes and how they were blended into one another.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, I suppose that the key word you've used there is immersive. So again, choosing to work with the virtual reality project, one of the things I'm fascinated in, always have been fascinated in as a cinematographer primarily and as a filmmaker, is the idea of how the photo reel works, and particularly now how the photo reel works in these new formats, and you know, the digital and then the I suppose the entirely spatial as well. We're constantly being offered now computer generated images that are passing for the photo reel. And what's really interesting, if you start to unpack it about how that works, is that you will find archive footage from Vienna 1908, which is slightly flickery and in black and white and very grainy with lots of marks on it, inherently immersive in a way that you won't with the highest level of modern digital offering, right? And there's various reasons for that, a lot of them that are technical, but it's very interesting to then we went on a journey across the duration of the short film through these different methods of capture, almost consciously, to sit them side by side and see how they kind of work and feel together. And then of course we had our own practical challenges to get around. So initially it was like, we're bringing you into the world with the idea of truth, which is the archive material, which you immediately buy into and do not question. And then next to that, we're putting real 35mm black and white film, which is, you know, incredibly, well, not incredibly, but quite rare now by the sort of, you know, the way we watch things. And then next to that, we were putting color digital capture. And we decided to make the dreams, or the imagined, not the dreams, but the imagined flashbacks color, to give them the extra kind of, I don't know, flavor or emotion, nostalgia of color. But then of course, because of we ran out of 35mm film, so we were also then forced to use digital as black and white and put those things together and grade some digital black and white capture back to meet the film. So then if you imagine that's also then going to be seen in the virtual reality, and then you're going to go into a entirely digitally generated space, you've kind of got the whole 100 years of film capture slid into sort of 7 minutes to make that happen. So the whole point of it all is to pull the immersive trigger at the beginning and to see how long you can keep that trigger held, to keep you under or in for as long as possible, because that's part of what filmmaking does. I mean, it's part of the magic, isn't it? That's part of what is always a fantastic trick, is to be able to be taken in and held there as if it's real. And it's still extraordinary to me now that the original chemical process is the closest we've got to seeing ourselves, and we're compelled by it. We buy into it completely. It's a second nature, an alternative reality for us now, almost regardless of its condition. And the extraordinary thing that happens over and over again now is the conceit at the beginning of a film which says based on a true story or real events. You immediately, that pulls your trigger. You are immediately like, oh well, that's fine then, let's go. So we kind of used that narrative conceit because it is based on a true story, and we use the cinematographic approach in the same way to achieve those ends.
You have also mentioned in the credits the University of Greenwich.
Yeah.
What kind of cooperation was it? Was it more about the research or
Well, they were looking for, I pitched it to them as a way of showcasing the talent within the School of Design as it was then, and also to work on something that lent towards the heritage side of storytelling in new forms, because I don't know if you know Greenwich at all, but Greenwich and the university in the middle of it is surrounded by extraordinary heritage sites, and so it was a way of kind of bringing this to the table and sort of showing what can be done and opening up that conversation about how traditional narratives and traditional heritage sites and experiences can be reviewed and reinvented and presented. Particularly for me, what I'm really interested with all of that is to opening that up to new audiences, because again, there seems to be a particular type of person, particular type of class of person that is more likely to go to an art gallery or a museum, and to be interested in these kind of stories. And again, these people were just young people making mistakes and doing their thing. The wild atonal classical music that they were playing was contemporary music of its time. They were edgy, dangerous. I don't know, I'm projecting onto it, but punk in their attitude. They were trying to disrupt. And so I think that there are so many interesting stories in history, in heritage, that just don't get seen for what they are, because they're seen through quite a stiff lens. They're not seen through like, oh, check this out, this is cool. They're held at a critical distance, because of the way that they're presented. And the people who might see these kind of projects are the future audience. And these stories are fascinating if they're viewed through the right lens. So that was the University of Greenwich were happy to fund the project on that basis, and it was as much about the immersive side of it as it is about the film. And the film is hopefully the kind of teaser trailer gateway to. It's all work in progress, honestly. It was a proof of concept project, so it requires further funding to be what it could and should be. And it's very scalable, as you can probably see. 6 or 7 minutes isn't really doing justice to the huge stories that these three characters have got to tell. The idea is to get a chance to tell them properly.
Yeah, if you see it at the end, you think about, okay, I would like to see more of it.
Good, well, that's a start.
That's a start, yeah.
When it comes to the texts, it's a minor detail. Maybe I'm focused on, but when it comes to the texts, you can see in the film the written papers. How did you make them? Are these the original texts that you rebrought with like old handwriting, or were they like copies of the actual text? How did you?
So.
Also the paintings, of course, you can see, are they also copies of the originals, or how did you
so there's
remake the art?
License taken there. So we've used there isn't that much written by Matilda, so we used some of what was written and we wrote into it. We wrote the letter, and Sarah Lloyd wrote the letter, and then a good friend of ours who's German, she then wrote the letter into German, and we did that to make it look as age appropriate as possible in terms of the quality of the paper and the fountain pen and things like that. Yeah, so in most, and the paintings we had, again, a friend of the production designer, Molly. She's a dab hand, literally, and she rendered the grinning Goetzel painting. There was an issue with the painting on set, and when we had to do casting, digitally like this, because we were, and that was early then, this was right at the beginning of COVID, so it was, auditions were kind of difficult. One of the things that was sort of key to it was Goetzel and Matilda they're all going to need to wave a brush, right? And so in the casting it was all very much like, so are you comfortable painting? And everyone was like, oh yeah, no problem. And of course when it came to it, they're not painters, they're actors, right? So we had to sort of shoot around that to some extent, you know. So that's again, I'm very aware of. I always think it's the difficult one with film, because you're playing to a broad audience, right? And if you do anything that requires an expertise, you kind of know that there are going to be audience members who have that expertise, and they're going to look at that and go, well, that is not how you do that, you know. That's if you were going to do that properly, you do this, this, and this. But you're kind of like, well, I'm not trying to say, you know, can't give it that amount of detail, I suppose, because I'm trying to get it done and tell the story. So it's conflated between there being some, we recreated some, we had one printed up, yeah, we had various approaches to how we were going to see it, basically. A lot of filmmaking artifice, but some kind of truth to it as well. Don't know, did that answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, especially because in our festival the huge topic of authenticity always comes up, of course.
Yeah.
And you know, if you work together with like reenactors or people from the science of history, they focus a lot on these details.
Yeah, there you go.
They like see, okay, the scabbard on the Roman soldier is on the wrong side, which would be a big mistake. Or if he handles something like, I don't know, a pen or something wrong, which would be something like a minor detail.
Well, I'm interested to hear what the audience has to say then in that way. I mean, we did our best to just honor the spirit of it.
Yeah.
We wanted to be able to.
As a hobby painter, I wouldn't have seen something wrong the way they did it, and especially there are some details like he used a spatula, or the way they use the fingers, like the artists of these times used to start, because they started to use the whole hand and the body for painting, and it makes it also very emotional the way you show it. So I think those are two components that immerse you a lot into the way art was made back then, and it's also a bridge to the emotional state of the three protagonists of the whole scene. And I think you did especially well in transporting emotion and the artistic approach and the story behind it in one video in such a short time, because it's pretty compressed, the whole thing. And as you said, I think the material would be, I don't know, you could make a period pick about it as well without any problems, and have also interesting side characters by it. So, well, Roman, if you have any more questions, because from my side it's very well discussed now.
Yeah, I would just have one final question. As far as I've seen, the film is very new. I think it was finalized at the beginning of this year. But I guess you have already showed it to some audience.
Not really, actually. No.
All right. Okay. Then the question.
You are its premiere. So.
Oh, really?
No, it's taken us a long time to nail down various bits of it. Yeah, we finally got it over the line, and we're very happy for you to be. It feels like the right place for it to be shown. First of all, obviously, you're leaning into you're specific to the nature of what it's about. So, and geographically correct, obviously. So, we're very happy to be there.
Oh, it's such an honor. Thank you.
That's big, yeah.
Yeah, then we will see. Then I have no question because I just wanted to ask how the audience reflected to it, but we will see it then with ours.
Yeah, no,
how it will
we'd
be.
love to have been there actually, but sadly,
yeah.
Because Walter, I must mention, Walter Stabb's been fantastic in sort of editing and also helping, move things forward. Now we're into the next phase. So we both would have really liked to have been there, but sadly we can't. So I'm interested to hear feedback. Any at all about any mistakes that we've made, but also how what the emotional response to it is as well is obviously fascinating.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Talk to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your kind words.